All right, everyone, we are going to get started on Module 1 here. So you've heard me talking about responsibility. You might have heard in our earlier conversations that responsibility is the secret sauce. I have worked with lots of couples over a variety of issues, and if I can say one thing, it is the couples who are willing to each take personal responsibility for their own lives that end up having more of the kinds of relationships in their life that they want to have. And so it is a huge component of what we'll be working on. So let's get going. Here is a William Ernest Henley quote from a poem called Invictus. You've probably heard it, you probably studied it in high school or something. But I want to highlight to you that you are going to be the focus because you are the one who has the power to change you. In his really powerful words, I am the master of my fate. I am the captain of my soul. It's a little dramatic, I know, but this is the essence of what I want you to be capturing in our time together. That you have an incredible power within you to comport yourself and send yourself in the direction that you want to go. And that comes by you keeping your focus where it can be the most productive, which is on your own self. When we start to take into consideration this question, what is responsibility? Let's understand what that exactly means when I'm saying that. So here's one definition: having control over someone and the ability to act independently and make decisions without authorization. So I would say that's pretty true, that we have the power to be responsible over our own selves. However, when we start to think about taking responsibility for other people, that's when that definition starts to break down. So let's look here at the difference between taking responsibility for yourself versus taking responsibility for others. In the category of for yourself, you can see that we're talking about taking responsibility for yourselves means knowing who you are. We'll be doing that through the exploration of values, principles, and beliefs in this program. Being congruent, meaning what you say you believe and what your behavior shows are congruent with each other. That's something that we will be putting into practice and making sure that our verbal story and our action story are in line with each other. Confront yourself. That means when your verbal story and your action story are out of line with each other, that we work to bring them back into being congruent. That gives us two choices. We can either change what we believe or we can change what we're doing. We have those two options to get those two back into being congruent. When they're not congruent, we have this thing called cognitive dissonance. And that means that we end up having lots of symptoms: depression and anxiety, lack of purpose, irritability, all kinds of challenges when we've got an incongruence with those, that verbal story and action story. So that's one thing that we'll definitely be working on. Learning how to calm yourself down. So I want you to be using your self-regulation tools that you set up in the homework. You'll be working on that homework in this module, to learn how to calm your own self down when you've gotten overwhelmed. Also in this, you will be working to figure out what it is that you need, and then figuring out how to gather the resources, perhaps including your partner, to make sure that you get your needs met. Often couples will come in and they feel so frustrated that their partner can't read their mind, that their partner doesn't have more kind of intuitive attunement to what it is that they're needing. And yes, that is frustrating. It would be nice if that's how relationships worked, but in general it's not. Sometimes we can get lucky, and sometimes we've been together long enough that we can make good guesses, but we don't want the relationship to rely on these assumptions and these kind of beliefs around reading each other's minds. We also don't want to put too much pressure on our partner to be the one to figure out what it is that we need. We know best. We may not know much. In fact, sometimes it's hard to figure out what it is that we need. But if there's anyone that can know, it is us. And so we have to start to go on the journey of clarifying what is it that we do need. What is the best way to nourish ourselves, to care for ourselves? What kinds of resources do we need to start gathering and pulling in towards ourselves in order to get that nourishment that we need? So these are the categories. These are some of the descriptors of how we take responsibility for our own self. Right here beside this is a list of ways in which we might accidentally start taking responsibility for others. These are some things that we want to be watching out for. One descriptor would be that it feels like the other person's problems, fill in the blank with emotions, feelings, irritability, stress level, challenges, fill in the blank. Their problems belong to you. If your partner's mood dips and yours automatically dips with them, you know that you're probably in responsibility for the other. We'll be working on this a lot. One of the things that we forget in this process is that taking responsibility for others in ways that they are capable of being responsible to their own self actually renders the other person less capable. So over the long haul in a relationship, a partner that's being taken responsibility for by their partner actually becomes less and less capable. This ends up actually decreasing their feelings of competency and decreasing trust going both ways. If every time your partner has a irritable mood and you feel overly responsible and start to work to manage that for them, manage their stress, manage their emotion, because their irritable mood feels inconvenient to you, you actually prevent them from the opportunity of learning self-regulation and calming their own self down, which is kind of then a self-fulfilling prophecy. It kind of keeps on cycling over and over. The partner actually ends up feeling less competent, less capable of making these things change for their own self-regulation and what have you, and they end up trusting their own self less. In the end, they may also begin to believe that you don't think they're capable, which would then decrease their trust in you. And so you can see how being responsible, taking responsibility for your partner, damages the relationship and actually creates more of some of the challenges that you're trying to get away from. One really helpful way that I like to construct this idea of self-focus under the umbrella of is, what is its function? One function I really like to consider when looking at self-focus is, how can I take such great care of myself so that I can love them better? Them is fill in the blank. That may be your partner, that may be your children, that may be your dogs, that may be your coworkers, your extended family. But the function of self-focus is not selfishness, but it prepares us to be better able, more capable, have more bandwidth to care for others in sensitive, attuned, patient ways. So that I can love them better, let's talk about what self-focus looks like in this way. Self-focus would describe you having the agency over your own problems, believing that the challenges that you're having belong in your yard and that you have the power to do something about them. It has a good amount of motivation in it, not helplessness, and pays attention to the challenges that are coming in and approaches them often with creativity. Another item that would help us delineate if we are in self-focus is that we are willing to ask for help. The goal within self-focus is certainly not self-sufficiency. Because like I've said, and I'll say it 10 more times, is that we were never meant to do this alone. But we have to be willing to ask for help. One thing about asking for help, as a little trick to remind you of, is that we really are asking. That means that there's an option that the answer could be no. If the other person is running into their own self-limits, then the answer should be no. And so we need to have a whole list of resources that we can use in order to take great care of ourselves. One other thing that self-focus does is that it keeps our tank from getting empty. We attempt to use self-focus via self-care preventatively. We work not to let our tank get completely empty, going on fumes, before we start to try to nourish ourselves, because by then it tends to be much more expensive. It's kind of like running out of gas on the side of the highway and having to get a tow truck and what have you. That was an expensive tank of gas, right? But if we go and get it preventatively, then it tends to go much better for us. As we're discussing what self-focus is, let's also consider what self-focus is not. Again, the function of self-focus is so that I can love them better. So we can describe some of the things that self-focus is not by considering that it often feels indulgent, right? We can kind of confront our own self and decide whether or not it ends up being indulgent, immature, right? It doesn't consider maturity as one of its highest values. It often has a lot of reactivity in it. It's self-serving and ignores the impact on the other. It's a nuanced description of self-focus that we'll try to kind of tease out and best understand when we're in self-focus and when we are in the more reactive, indulgent, kind of selfish focus. But one of the ways we could describe that is that we're ignoring the impact. The goal is to be impacted by the ways that it's impacting other people, but that we are not governed by this. It's a nuance that we'll be working to clarify. One other thing that self-focus is not is punishing. We don't use it to punish the other. This is one of the reasons we have to use it so preventatively. If we've waited until we're in an emergency to pursue self-care, then we blow out, we shout, we are cruel with our words, we are completely in disregard of the impact that it has on the other. Because we waited too long to take good care of ourselves. My belief on this is that other focus is our kryptonite in this process. One of the reasons why is that other focus ends up disregarding and neglecting our own true needs and wants. And so in that process of getting so over-focused on the other person's problems, we end up neglecting ourselves and then starting that cyclical process of then damaging the relationship out of that. Other focus ends up having us losing ourselves in the care and the attention of others. Often when we have new experiences and new requirements, new responsibilities that come into our life. Maybe that's having a child, or maybe that's taking on new responsibilities at work. We often, for a moment, will lose part of ourselves and our life will become imbalanced. The goal is that that is not a chronic state of being, because if it is chronic, if you're chronically undernourished, the best parts of you, your identity, your values, principles, and beliefs will end up taking up much less space in your life and much less space in the world. And that is one of the outcomes that comes about from being in too intense other focus, is that we forget to clarify, grow, build, progress with our own identity. Other focus, one way we would describe that is that Our main goal, our only goal, our highest goal is to make the other happy. That could be your partner, that could be your child, but either of those is going to be problematic when the other person's mood, emotion, affect, and kind of way of being are our best litmus test of how we're doing in this world. We are going to end up being imbalanced. They may be having a stressful day, and if when your partner walks in the door and drops their bag and does a heavy sigh, your entire body crinkles up inside, you start believing negative things about your own self and the ways in which you created that problem, you actually become less of a resource, less capable of supporting them if it feels like their mood is a direct reflection on how you're doing in life. This is another way to describe that idea I was just talking about, is riding another person's emotional roller coaster. If they're up, you're up. If they're down, you're down. That's one of the ways that we often will describe kind of very intense relationships and being in love with people, but it also ends up having really negative impacts over the long haul. To not be able to be stable, steady, happy, content when our partner is irritable, nor being able to be serious, challenged, frustrated, in deep thought when our partner is very happy. And so the goal is that we kind of untether our feelings and emotions from theirs so that we each get to be honest about where we are and how we're doing and what it is that we need at that moment. One other major piece that happens is that our identity gets foggier and foggier. One of the challenges of this foggy identity when we're in other focus is that we stop having purpose. We stop moving forward. And often we end up blaming it on our partner because it feels like we've had to get so small in order to kind of compromise with their mood or emotions that we end up becoming less and less of a person. And that ends up creating lots of challenges, not just in our relationship with our partner, but then you can only imagine how that would also really create challenges in our parenting relationship as well. And I am going to be continuing to make longer the list of dirty words in this program. And so the next one to put on that list is we. Now you'll notice I may say we talking about a collective, but what I mean is when you are talking on behalf of your partner instead of allowing your partner to talk for their own self. And so that's a word that the goal is to leave it off the vocabulary, the word we, when referencing myself and my partner when I'm speaking on behalf of my partner. One of the things that it reflects is this kind of assumption of what it is that they think. It doesn't make space for their own opinion if it's different from yours. And it kind of blends the two of you together. And that's one of the things that the program will be working on, is to really increase the autonomy so that you can actually have more connection between the two. So you might be wondering at this point, why is it so easy to get tangled if all of these things that you're talking about, this other focus, seems to cause so many problems? How come it seems to be so easy to get mixed up into? Well, first off, other people become very important to you. If your partner has become important to you, that means in practical, in emotional, and all kinds of ways. When someone becomes important to you, the likelihood that you're going to get tangled up with them, meaning becoming responsible for them in ways that don't belong to you, is really likely. And that's because this next piece is you're a mammal. So you have a brain that is that of an animal's, and so we have a lot of survival mechanisms and defense structures that work to keep us safe, and those are based in our kind of mammalian brain, and that creates some behaviors that actually aren't that helpful in human interactions. And so when we are interacting from our kind of animal brain, then we are much more likely to step in ways that are not respectful to our partners and aren't realistic about how important maybe the behavior that they're doing is. Another reason that it's really easy to get tangled is that people don't like to feel anxious and they don't like to feel helpless. And those are two of the feelings that you'll often have to manage if you're going to stay in self-focus and stay out of other focus. When your partner is struggling with something and you are on purpose choosing to pay attention to your own self, breathe deeply, allow them to feel the feelings that they are having, you may experience feelings of helplessness. I will help you work through those, but that would be a really normal way to feel, and that's not a thing that we try to move towards often. So the alternative is just to take over the other person's problems and deal with them yourself. Another piece that I'll discuss is that I believe that the media sells us this picture of being responsible for one another because they sell the picture of having a soulmate. You know, the mythological story is that we were once bound, we were once one whole, and that was too powerful, and so then we were split into two halves as a punishment, and that we were flung to opposite ends of the universe so that for the rest of our lives we would be wandering looking for the other half of our true self, and that's where the idea of soulmates came from. You can understand then how that would create some real problems, create some codependency and challenges within the relationship if we believed that we could only be completed, in a sense, by our partner. It creates an over-reliance and pressure that doesn't tend to bode well for the relationship. Individualistic culture often forgets the importance of friendships and other resources. The idea that the marriage or that the primary relationship partnership should be the sole source of all relational satisfaction and support puts an incredible amount of pressure on that relationship. And so we don't learn often how to make new friends, how to grow friendships as adults, and that ends up increasing the pressure on our primary, maybe romantic partnership. And we'll talk about how growing friendships, growing alternate resources actually relieves pressure on your primary relationship and allows for the opportunity for more connection. So let me talk to you about these two words I'll be using often within the program. I'll describe it by setting up a spectrum of the two life forces. On one end, we have autonomy, and on one end, we have togetherness. And those forces are kind of always tugging us towards the autonomy and towards the togetherness, and kind of a seesaw sort of action, going one way and going the other, sometimes having a hard time finding a good balance in between. One of the things that can happen when we've gone too far towards either end is that there are some challenges. In fact, we can talk about having too much of a good thing. When we have too much autonomy, some of the challenges is that we are kind of stuck in this rugged individualism, this idea of self-sufficiency, that I must be able to do all of this on my own, or else that means that I'm weak. It often ends up creating isolation and being underconnected, disconnected, and cut off from these really important and valuable relationships. And then too much togetherness will end up creating what you've heard of as codependency, often what I described earlier of riding an emotional roller coaster, being connected and tethered to your partner's feelings and emotions, and also constantly taking other people's emotional temperature to understand how you're doing, to understand how you're faring, how you're performing. It ends up creating this connection between two people that causes a lot of challenges and a lot of pressure in those relationships. And so it's something that we want to prevent against. One of the things often people hear when they hear too much togetherness, they think that can't possibly be. We're so disconnected. We have all of these challenges. But let me talk to you about the idea that I believe it all symptoms start with being over together. Other people are incredibly important to us, not just in the emotional sense, but also to our practical survival. And so often we start off in being, especially in our primary relationships with our parents or with our partners or with our children, that we start off being in the over together position. That means it feels like the relationship has the power to have a sink or swim. And often when we start in that over together, we get very easily stimulated by anything that the other person does. You can understand then how being over together could create some of the stuff that we see, some of the disconnect we see. If we end up being overstimulated by the discomfort of our partner, the first move that we will make will be towards the other end, which will have us being under together. That's why the idea is that over together breeds under together. Being overstimulated by your partner creates a disconnect and what we'll talk about called cutoff. The goal of this program is to get you back to having the opportunity to be connected and have a working relationship by working on this. It's hard to believe that we are disconnected because at one point we were overstimulated by our partner. So at first I'll just ask you to trust me that this is true, and then I'll show you as we work through some different things how that overstimulation actually creates that disconnect. I'll often talk to you about where I hope you land. And that is, as you can see in this hashtag life goals slide, in the middle road. The middle road is a descriptor that I often use as the balance between the autonomy and the togetherness life forces. So middle road, one of the ways that, or some of the ways we can describe what it feels like, what it looks like to be in the middle road is not in over together, not in under together, not too much autonomy, not too much togetherness, but instead connected. We feel impacted and not governed. And when we are able to be impacted but not governed, we can do these other things. We can feel compassionate. We can feel aware of our partner. We can also feel clear about who we are and what our values are. We are able to be aware of the impact but not mandated by and guided by our internal values. Often the middle road feels clear and defined, but it feels warm and connected. So that's the balance that we're going to be constantly looking for. If it's got an edge, or if it's got an angst, or if it's got a rigidity to it, it's probably too far into autonomy. And if it's got a desperation, and if it's got a neediness, and it has a lack of clarity, and a fear of the other's discomfort, then it's probably too far into the over together. So what we're going to be working on is middle road. You'll see in this next slide, I've created a very important thing that you're welcome to post on your wall, keep in your wallet, do whatever you want with it. But it's a permission slip. And it states that you are hereby allowed to take care of yourself and focus on your problems. The reason I give you this permission slip jokingly is that sometimes it feels like we need permission. We need permission to take care of ourselves because for some reason, culture, society, our family, our internal critic, whatever it is, has not given us permission to take care of our own self. We only know our identity in the ways that we take care of others and prop them up. And that has got to stop. We don't end up being able to show up in meaningful, warm, connected, compassionate ways when we are over-focused on the other. And so I want to give you permission. So if you needed permission, here it is. I hope that you can internalize this and allow this permission slip to have you focusing on what's most important. So I know I talked to you earlier about the secret sauce being self-responsibility. Now I want to talk to you about the secret ingredient in the secret sauce, and that is self-regulation. Basically, it's your ability to calm your own self down. This is an incredibly important set of skills that we're going to be working on. One of the reasons why is because it makes us use a different part of our brain when we're calm, and that's going to be very important in this process. So the frontal lobe, the front part of our brain that's responsible for logic and for decision making and for executive functioning, that part of our brain shuts down when we get stimulated. And so when we get stimulated by stress or overwhelm or emotions, different things like that, then a different part of our brain starts to run the show, and that's the back of our brain. We can call it the hindbrain or the reptilian brain, but regardless, it's not the frontal lobe, and it doesn't have the same capacity for decision making and productive conversations. Self-regulation gives us access back to the important part of our brain, which is the front part. And so we will be working on all the different ways to calm down so that we can have those conversations that are really valuable, that are logical, in which we don't take things personal, in which we don't get defensive, in which we listen well and reflect back what we're hearing. Because all of this together creates the opportunity for us to be the partner, the parent, the employee, the citizen of the world that we want to be, which is thoughtful, intentional, rather than reactive, thoughtful in our responses. And that's a very valuable thing to have in a relationship and just to have in the world, to have in our model of being a parent to children whose little brains go offline all the time. And so that's a very important part of this entire project, is learning self-regulation, self-soothing, and learning how to calm yourself down. So as you will move on, we've come to the end of Module 1, and so I am going to tell you a little bit about the homework that you have. So when you are done with listening to this, the very next thing you can do is download the homework worksheet that is under this video. And I want you to work first on those self-regulation tools that you're going to utilize. So you can just think about anything that has you feeling relief and has your brain calming down. So that may be walking the dog, that may be journaling, yoga, intense exercise, shouting into a pillow, talking to a friend, getting a cup of tea, reading a good book, listening to a funny clip on YouTube. You're going to be the one who's going to decide what's going to be the most supportive self-regulation techniques. I want you to just start with 4 and start practicing those, and let's hone those in as best we can. Then I want you to shift down, and the quote from the poem at the beginning of the presentation, I want you to write it down somewhere. I don't care if it's on a sticky note, I don't care if it's with marker on the back of your hand. I want you to choose a place where you're going to notate that you are in charge of your life and start taking that really seriously. After that, I want you to write another thing down. I want you to start paying attention to what clues and cues do you have, what words do you start to use that tell you you have gotten into other focus. I want you to be responsible to paying attention to that, and I want you to write down some of the words that you might start using when you have shifted into the other focus. Those might just be the ones that are written there, but I want you to also write those on your bathroom mirror, write them on a sticky note, put them in your wallet, make a note on your phone. I want you to do the practice of writing them down so you get into observation, get into the position of perspective so that you can see your own self. And then last, I want you to make a note of these questions, and the next time that you're spending some time together, I want you to be asking each other these thoughtful questions, paying attention to your good listening skills. One tip for listening skill is that while your partner is talking, you're not preparing your response. So we're going to start just working on some basic listening skills and curiosity. So I want you to go through this homework, be thoughtful about it, complete it, and then we will have our coaching call and we can discuss anything that tripped you up about this or what you are starting to learn about yourself. Okay guys, after we finish this module and this homework, we'll be moving on to module 2 after I let you know it's time. Okay, I'll see you in the next video.